Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. Mark, one of the things that I really love about Wednesdays is we put together basically a Who's Better segment, and you always are able to kind of come up with the statistics. And one of the things I really like about it is the fact that we're able to kind of take these big picture ideas, these big picture topics, and kind of break it down in a way we can kind of look at maybe some different statistics and kind of compare different quarterbacks. And last week we took a look at Alabama quarterbacks, but we looked at it from their professional careers. We've also looked at Auburn linebackers and Alabama running backs and just different categories altogether. Tonight we go with Auburn quarterbacks, but going back to their college football days. And one of the things that we'll highlight, though, is quarterbacks that spent different amount of years at Auburn. A guy like Cam Newton only spent 1 year there. Yep. Meanwhile, Nick Marshall, a couple of years as the starter, and also Pat Sullivan, who played back in the day. So for today, what are some of the things that you looked at as you broke down these Auburn QBs?
This was really hard to do because when you're looking at overall numbers, you have to give consideration to some guys.
Yeah.
So Stan White needed consideration because he has the most passing yards in Auburn history.
That's right.
Yet he has negative 12 interceptions to touchdowns. So you can't really put him on a list as the best or among the best when you're dealing with some of the numbers, 30 differentials to passing positive on a positive side with some of these other guys. Cam Newton was just too good to ignore. You could say, okay, well, it has to be at least 2 seasons playing at Auburn, because when you get into win percentage, that can be unfair for Newton because he only played 1 year. I mean, he won 14-0.
Right.
But some of these other guys had undefeated seasons too. But they combined that with other seasons where maybe they had 3 or 4 losses.
Right.
So you wanted to make that as fair as possible. When all said and done, you could break it down by per game basis, or you could break it down by a yearly basis. I think you need to do a kind of a combination of both just to get an overall evaluation. So we looked at quarterback rating. We looked at yards gains per scrimmage, because a lot of these running backs could pass the ball, but they also could run the ball and be dual threats in a conference where you really saw the benefit of that. Where, what Cam Newton did in 2010 was outstanding. So I think a lot of those factors I had to consider, and there had been some other guys too that I thought should be mentioned. That I know you saw play when you were a little bit younger.
Exactly, and you talk about a guy like Stan White, who you brought up earlier, also Brandon Cox. He and I kind of the similar age. I remember him, playing both in high school and at Auburn, and also Damian Craig, who went on to have a great career with Auburn, and now he's an assistant coach on the college level as well. So I mean, those are guys that I really liked, and some of the guys that like you said that we're breaking down here kind of played in different eras. Number one. And also where the QB run became such a big part, such an integral part of the game. Now, I know Jarrett Stidham was not as good of a runner as a Nick Marshall. But he had a great arm, so which I think kind of the total yardage actually matters. Pat Sullivan kind of playing in an era where you're seeing right now where they didn't throw the ball a ton, but he was able to still put up a really, really strong career as far as an overall passer, and obviously won the Heisman Trophy as well. Him and Cam Newton coming away with that Heisman Trophy. So let's take a look at the yards per scrimmage per game and kind of juxtapose that to the overall total touchdowns. And one of the things I think that kind of, the fact that stands out is that, you kind of look at Cam Newton kind of blowing everybody away. However, a guy like Jason Campbell, which I know a lot of people really knew and liked, played in a really deep backfield with a Ronnie Brown and a Cadillac Williams. And so I don't think all yards per scrimmage are built the same, especially when you're surrounded by different people.
Well, I think, too, different guys have different strengths. So most of these guys had a lot of the same strengths, though, which means they had a low percentage of turning the ball over. Most of these guys didn't throw interceptions. Even Sullivan, going back into his day, had a positive interception to touchdown ratio. And if you look at total TDs, now Sullivan played at a time where freshmen weren't allowed to play, so we're judging 3 seasons for him, which isn't like there wasn't such a drastic difference in games played where guys played 4 years and they were so clearly ahead of the others. Maybe Stan White could have said that because he did play 4 years.
That's right.
But with all these guys, they were at least between 2 and 3 years, and Cam Newton obviously 1 year. And Sullivan, I thought, held up pretty good over that.
Yeah.
I didn't expect him to be as good as he was. He was a pretty good runner, too. But But I think what hurt him was going into one of the years where they had a chance for the national championship. They lost their final 2 games of the year. They lost to a ranked Alabama team, number 3 Alabama, number 3 Oklahoma, back-to-back weeks, where I think that maybe diminished his ability to be the best. Newton, you don't have to worry about that. But Nick Marshall also, he had really key moments that you never forget, like the game against Georgia, with that miracle play, okay? And as far as yards per scrimmage, he's right up there. Well, maybe not right up there. I mean, 50, 60 back of Cam Newton isn't really fair. But total touchdowns and yards per game, as far as a running threat and passing threat, he was right up there with being on somewhat of a level of Cam Newton, even though he wasn't as good. More than I think Jarrett Stidham was, who wasn't a good runner. He was okay, but him and Campbell really didn't have the running skills that Marshall and Newton did.
Exactly, and I think one of the things that's always interesting with this is like it's always the what ifs, because what if Cam stayed? What if Cam was there for 3 years? What if he didn't go to Florida and then had to go to junior college? What if Nick Marshall did start out as a DB before he became a quarterback? What if Jarrett Stidham didn't have to start out at a Big 12 school before he came to Auburn? And then what if Pat Sullivan played in an era that had a little bit more passing? What if Jason Campbell didn't have that strong running game that kind of threw off what would be his passing yards? So as far as the overall question goes, I'll throw it to you first, as we do each week. Who's better, and who do you like as far as from their college days?
Okay, well, look, obviously, if we're going to go, it's a no-brainer that Cam Newton is the best as far as results.
Right.
But I have a soft spot for Nick Marshall.
Yeah.
Because he was part of a lot of exciting plays. Not only did you have the game against Georgia, but you also had the kick six. That wasn't because of him.
Right.
But he also led the game-tying touchdowns down. Where really no one thought that Alabama team was going to lose.
Right.
So I remember watching that and just shocked out of my mind. Now, at that point, I hadn't experienced life down here or what it was like to really know life as an Alabama fan and how shocking that really was to people when they lost that game. But if you're an Auburn fan, and if you're not an Auburn fan, if you're just a national college football fan, that's a game you will never, ever forget, a moment you will never forget. Yeah. That was, you're just coming off the Georgia game, which was just as much of a miracle. On a 4th and 26. I remember I was in my car driving to church that night, and I was disappointed because back then I was a South Carolina fan. So I'm looking at it like, Georgia's going to wind up winning, and South Carolina's going to have a chance to win the East. And then out of nowhere, I see touchdown. And I didn't know where it came from. I had to pull over, calling people, how did this happen? So for people who even wasn't involved in being a Georgia fan or an Auburn fan, it had, memories for me too. So I think those moments are things you'll never forget if you're an Auburn fan or an SEC fan or a college football fan. And if you can give us 2 of those moments, like Nick Marshall did. That's why he's my favorite.
Exactly. Obviously, I'm right there with you too. And I think obviously Cam is the best one. Obviously, overall, put together that 1 year, that great resume. Everything kind of came together. Perfect offensive line, great defense as well. But I kind of had that same spot for Jason Campbell in that offense. It wasn't really Campbell. It was that whole unit. It was that entire offensive unit. So fun to watch. They could run. They could throw. And they kind of seemingly changed the way that college football was played. And you had some of the spread, but I think with them you had that power running game. And I think Jason Campbell ended up being a first-round draft pick of the Washington Redskins, and I think, or Washington football team. This is at the time, and that offense. I think that offense was just so fun.
Ronnie Brown,
fun to watch.
Is that Ronnie Brown and Cadillac?
Ronnie Brown, Cadillac was on that team as well. I had a great fullback, incredible defense. So I'm right there with you as well. I think a lot of people would think on Cam. But you can make some arguments either way for
everybody's got their favorites. Well. Everybody's got the guy that they just like better for whatever reason. And to me, Nick Marshall was that guy.
Exactly. I think so too. It was definitely worth the dive in. And once again, thank you for another great installment of Who's Better here on Overtime. Coming up next here on Overtime, we will head over to another sport going into the playoffs. It's getting really hot in the NBA. Some interesting storylines after last night's games we'll discuss next.